Travis Wingate. So, back in the 80s, before I went to Rick's, there were BYU students who were going to Las Vegas for the weekend. They would get married at the Temple of Elvis or whatever, and have sex in a hotel. At the end of the weekend, they'd have their marriage annulled, and back to BYU they'd go as if nothing had ever happened. They didn't think there was anything wrong with that because they were following the letter of the law of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Don't have sex outside the bonds of marriage. Otherwise you're violating the law of chastity. And so they thought, hey, we're perfectly legitimate in the eyes of God to do this and no problems. Well, it didn't take too long before people found out and spread the word and got back to bishops and the presidency at BYU, and then of course the leaders of the church, and the crackdown was made, spoiling their fun. At Rick's we had the red light district. I didn't really know much about the red light. I sort of had an idea from Lady Red Light. Lady Red Light, rock me tonight. But, or yes, Stain. Roxanne, you don't have to put on the red light. So I sort of had an idea, but I thought, Mormons? They wouldn't actually do that, would they? But yeah, up in the apartment buildings where my future first wife would be, I saw red lights. That was weird. Maybe I should have done a scientific study to observe the mating rituals. I'm right here. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Nocturnal habits. But my mom had been watching Billy Graham with the advent of TV. Billy Graham was an evangelical and sort of helped evangelicals take off. Apparently, as I'm reading their Wikipedia page, he began his career with the support of the McIntyre and fellow conservatives Bob Jones Sr. and John R. Rice. He wanted to broaden his reach of his London crusade of 1954 by accepting support from denominations who were disapproved of. And so conservatives condemned him and withdrew their support, apparently. But evangelicals, for the most part, are very conservative. They're the ones who are now supporting the majority of those who belong to QAnon. That's how whacked out evangelicals have become. My mom, however, watched Billy Graham practically every day that he was on, and I asked her, why are you watching this? He's not Mormon. He's not a Mormon prophet. And he says, well, he preaches a lot of good things and a lot of things that are the same in Mormonism. This is how evangelicals have infiltrated the Mormon Church. My mom, born and raised Mormon as well, in a strict Mormon household as well, and went on a mission in the Eastern States Mission back then, and so she was more educated in Mormonism than most women were. Most women were at that time, and with my dad, or my grandfather's, my mom's father's educational pursuits, as my mom also became educated. She went to BYU Hawaii, and I think that was it for post-high school. Because in Utah she was just working as a dental assistant, and she wasn't going to school. But and so she was educated. She had the Journal of Discourses that was sort of given to me, because the church had shunned it by the late 1990s, calling it work of fiction to separate themselves from Brigham Young and his atrocities. And it was given to me, but then they took it back, unless they threw it away. I doubt they threw that away, so they need to give that back to me. I think I have it on PDF anyway. But evangelicals are, well, as it says here at Wikipedia, I'll just stick to that. They encourage engagement in social concerns. Yeah, they create social concerns is more like it. And they promote high standards of academic scholarship. No, more like they encourage people to get degrees and then take over scholarship because they disapprove of the scientific fields, and so they want to replace them with their Bible scholarship. And then something about rejecting the ecclesiastical separatism promoted by McIntyre. But the social concerns and the academic scholarship are the two that are destroying our nation. If you remember Origin of the Species, because I'm sure all of us were around that time when Darwin wrote it, it freaked out religious folk. Monkeys? I'm not from a monkey. Yeah. And so instead of having an actual scientist show that Darwin was out in the night, the Christians instead got thrashed on by scholarship, as they, for example, made fun of Christians for believing that Noah had every single species of animal on his ark, according to the measurements given in the Bible. And this is where it's necessary to have knowledge, because it's the same error that Mormons make in regards to the papyri, the Egyptian papyri. Egyptologists mock Mormons by saying, we can't find the Hebrew word Abraham anywhere in the Egyptian text. I shouldn't have to wait too long before it finally clicks in your head as to what that means. Likewise, it shouldn't have taken Christians long to have it click into their heads what the scientists were talking about with Noah. and how they got played as chumps. Because Christians could have simply responded, no, it wasn't species, it was family groups. And that was shut up the scientists. But no, they didn't want to do it, and instead they wanted to fight and argue unsound reasoning as to why God's mystical ways of magical supernatural ability can do whatever he wants regardless of the laws of physics. But that's the same thing that a Mormon apologists do. But yeah, Evangelicals and Mormons have been sharing notes as Evangelicals have been infiltrating Mormonism to overthrow it and turn it away from Mormonism and the science that it was originally, and turn it into a supernatural deity where faith only is all that's necessary. And then you throw out a whole bunch of idol worshiping in regards to social concerns, and voila, you've destroyed society with QAnon. And so whereas Evangelicals had creationism and wanted to force the government to have creationism taught in the schools, they were competing against the Big Bang Theory, evolutionary theory, and the age of the earth theory. And like I said, just understand the science, and then you realize, well, Big Bang, evolution are both situations where we cannot replicate it. So all these scientists that are supporting the Big Bang and going further with it, evolutionary theory, the theory of evolution rather than evolutionary theory, because yes, just take a look at all the variety of humans on Earth. Yes, there is an evolution of some kind, but it's not the leap of we came from monkeys. Even my DNA says, yes, I go back millions of years, but no monkeys. Monkeys! And so, as I'm doing porn videos for you, let's talk about their social concerns. Another instance of Mormon culture has been a group of swingers, swapping partners, and in order to justify this, they've had a common groupthink where they believe that exaltation has no boundaries, that we're all just friends and we're all part of the same brotherhood, sisterhood situation. And they actually deny the sealing ceremony of spouses to each other and only to each other. And as a result, this friendship eternity justifies them into participating in swinging, swapping partners. And they had a group that moved into the new subdivisions that were being built on the Draper Hills, where the temple is now. Yay! But of course, something like that, there's always somebody who's going to leak it. I'm going to tell. And bishops found out, and of course the brethren find out, and sort of put a stop to. But those kinds of situations, how do you stop it if you don't catch them in the act? And that's been a dangerous mindset, as I learned of this in the 2000s, and then when I was released from captivity after 6 years of my life, a friend, or a person wanting to be my friend, who has since left being my friend, started talking in that mindset of this group that I had known 10 years earlier, and that kind of concerned me. And he was also getting into Doterra and other pyramid scams. Doterra is the oils that cause harm. So bad news all around. But how evangelicals understand the Ten Commandments is that when it says no idols, well, they take it to the extreme and say, well, obviously no porn. Porn is not the way they understood it. They created the definition. If you, well, we'll talk about it with adultery. And so they went on a social concern about how pornography is destroying America, destroying our social societies, and destroying the family unit, and such forth and forever. And so then they got people into the high standards of academic scholarship, into psychiatry, where you also get people into the government so that they can accept psychiatry. Or you can just have people go into the Mormon Church, do it from there, as they do in Utah. But then you start getting psychiatrists who end up supporting it with fake science studies. Real science has a process and procedure that has to be followed, and it's logical. It's not unsound. But the evangelical scholarship, science, is a fake pseudoscience that does not use standard measurements. They use their Christian beliefs, their evangelical beliefs, to impose and just create stuff. And if people were to step back and pay attention, the mind response for certain behaviors or actions are the exact same as if you were in a marriage relationship. And nobody stops to think. And so, in regards to no idolatry of the Ten Commandments, they take it to the extreme of no fornication. Well, that fornication is in the New Testament, right? Well, fornication in Greek is porn. Not the original porn, the slang term maybe, but the modern version of porn. It's not the original word that would have been in there, and it reveals when the text would have been written. And so, porn, in the current sense, is sex for money. But when you have a lack of understanding of the definitions and the original languages, then you start making stuff up. And so people will say, oh, see, it says right here in the Bible, Travis, no fornication. That's sex out of marriage. No, that's paying for sex. That's the slang term back in the Greek time, as they were making fun of the women who were standing by the statues, before the statues, thus prostitute before the statue. And so you can see how hedge laws were created out of ignorance. And so with no lust, thou shalt not lust after a woman. And I've been in classes where the teacher's trying to create a difference between sexual desire and lust. Evangelicals say, oh, it's all the same. And thus the concept of you can only have sex in the marriage, only for kids. And that's it. Every other time you must suppress this. Yeah. And how well does it work for women suppressing their monthly cycle? And so how often does men have their cycle? A lot sooner than once a month. And so people miss that. Plus they also miss woman, not virgin. There's a difference. And it has to do with idolatry, or adultery. And not anything else. And so these kinds of things are misunderstood as they impose their morality upon society, and they get governments to make laws based upon their religious morality. And the First Amendment specifically says freedom of religion, but there's not supposed to be favoring of one religion in government. And unfortunately, when you look at Utah, clear violation of everything. And so these kinds of errors have been corroding our society when people think that they're trying to help society make it better for the new world order of Satan. He takes away agency. Understand that? There are 3 kingdoms of glory. We get to choose which kingdom we choose to be in. There's a whole ton of scriptures in the Book of Mormon about wrong beliefs, but I'm probably over 3 hours on this video. And so I want to get to just 2, well, maybe 1. Oh, also with Evangelical, I don't want to forget, they started in the end of the 20th century. They started getting militant and using militant terms. The Army of Israel, but more so in militant terms. If you remember, Nelson, when he had his first youth talk as president of the church, he talked to them about creating a youth battalion. So you can see how evangelicalism has spread into the Mormon church in that regard as well. And so I knew it because I saw it in Hitler's youth. And here Nelson was doing the youth battalion, which also was tied to evangelicals. And then, of course, the evangelicals are the big ones who are pushing the religious freedom movement, despite having the First Amendment, which guarantees freedom of religion. And the church, of course, is wanting to join evangelicals, sharing similar beliefs. That's what they claim. They have been indoctrinated by evangelicals. This is not the Church of Joseph Smith, as Nelson tells us. And so in Alma, chapter 4, we could use Doctrine and Covenants. Maybe I'll do that next. I'm only at 24 minutes. So, Alma, chapter 4, verse 3. Well, I'll start over in 2. This is after the wars had ceased and no more contentions among the people. And so in verse 2, but the people were afflicted, yea, greatly afflicted for the loss of their brethren, and also for the loss of their flocks and herds, and also for the loss of their fields of grain, which were trodden under the foot and destroyed by the Lamanites. This is the results of war and contention, is you lose, humanity. Lives are lost. You lose loved ones, and you lose food. And so, that sort of tends to cause a problem. And insecurity, food insecurity. And so in verse 3, and so great were their afflictions that every soul had cause to mourn. Now listen carefully to what Mormon is telling us as he's reporting on this story. And they believed. Did you catch that? He's not saying it was because. He's saying they believed that it was the judgments of God sent upon them because of their wickedness and their abominations. Therefore, they were awakened to a remembrance of their duty. And so then, as a result of believing that it was the judgments of God, in verse 4, they began to establish the church more fully, and many were baptized and joined the church. And this is the false doctrine of the pride cycle that the church CES teacher created. Creatio ex nihilo. To try to think that he's got some grand scheme of human behavior. Wrong. No. It all has to do with our beliefs. If we believe incorrectly, the consequences will be incorrect. Just like Mormons who thought that they can go down to Vegas and get married and then have it annulled and come back as if nothing happened. Just as the swingers on the hills of Draper thought that, or Chad Daybell, he was in the news the other day for his hearing is scheduled for January, I believe. And he believed that he had an afterlife, a near-death experience, and therefore thought that he then was going to be the one to usher in the millennium of peace with war and bloodshed, as Lori Vallow was going to be the goddess who was going to be the Lord's sword of vengeance upon zombies like her children. It's the belief systems that screws everything up. And it's in here in the Book of Mormon as recognized. They believed. And it wasn't. It was because they had incorrect belief systems. Now, he previously talks about this in chapter 3. Verse 19. So it's not too many verses after that he talks about what I just did. And he says, now I would that you should see. Now he's talking about the Amlicites who had defected from the Nephites and gone over to the Lamanites. And they had marked themselves in their forehead with the 666. It's just a red mark. He says that, now I would that you should see that they, the Amlicites, brought upon themselves the curse. And even so doth every man that is cursed bringeth upon himself his own condemnation. He explains the truth about the judgments of God. Whereas, after explaining to us directly, we cause our cursings. Not God, we do. When we choose the wrong because of an incorrect belief, the consequences are disaster, destruction, error, sin, crime, etc. A failed product. a system that makes things worse rather than better. And then big difference from they believed that it was the judgments of God. They refused to accept that they caused it. And instead they got idol worship. They got idol worshiping in their veins, in their brains, as they believed that they weren't responsible, but were being punished by a supernatural being that they'd created. And so, let's go to Doctrine and Covenants, section 1, verse 16, because it's talking directly to Mormons. If Mormons did not know, because only Mormons can break temple covenants, right, Mormons? Those who don't make temple covenants can't break them if you didn't make them. And so, still talking about Mormons, 16, they, Mormons, seek not the Lord to establish his righteousness, but every man walketh in his own way, after the image of his own God. And so it's not a physical manifestation of an idol. It's the belief system, the word Mormons believe in, that results in the manifestation of the fruit of an idol. If you believe that porn is evil and that you need to punish men who have desires, what's going to be the result? You're going to have some men guilty, feeling guilty, and doing unspeakable things because they go crazy not being able to control it. And you'll have, for those men who want to do things with other men, then you have the conversion therapy held at the basement of the Joseph Smith building at BYU, the electric shock treatment from Clockwork Orange, which Clockwork Orange, the Stanley Kubrick, makes sure to point out at the end of the movie that you don't cure this kind of disease. There's a natural biological function, and then there's just pure wickedness, just pure evil. And the characters in Clockwork Orange were just pure evil. They weren't typical boys being boys. And we hear that a lot, is that Mormon men in positions of authority like to protect their own sons and those of prominent leaders and football players, because everybody needs to have their football team, so that they get away with it, and they say, oh, it's just boys being boys. And so the rape kits have been piling up, and they didn't get around to start doing them until 2017, and then it got worse because we're under Trump, as white supremacy and rapes are on the rise, and all because we refuse to properly teach our boys and girls sex education, not Christianized, Mormonized education of sex. So that's why I've disowned my parents, mom especially, why I condemn her for the evils that she's done, is because she believed that I was a wicked kid because I didn't get myself my own home with a white picket fence, 2 cars, one for me and one for the wife, and for the house for the kids, with a backyard that they can play in, and have credit cards so that the wife can go shopping and blah blah blah. using the family proclamation to divide my family, to separate my family, because I'm the wicked one. I just barely graduated. But, my dad did it after he graduated from Berkeley. He was able to get a job at Ford Motor Company. Yeah, but why? Remember the Pinto? Remember what a success that was? Yeah, that scandal gave my dad an opportunity to go work for Ford. And so my dad knew all about the scandal as a result. And that's why all automobile businesses now make defective products that break down and cause us to go to a mechanic or to buy the parts to replace the parts if we're smart enough to know our own cars and have the tools that can twist around to get to the bolts to take it undone. They knew exactly what they were doing to scam people out of money. Automobile industry is a huge industry still, even though in 2008 they wanted a bailout. And so my dad's generation was completely different than Reagan economics. Reagan economics tanked our system. But I saw it. My parents didn't, even though they did, because when they moved to Utah to work on their retirement years, my dad couldn't get the job anymore. He had to search, and the church gave him a job teaching at Business Institute, LDS Business College, I guess. And then he finally got a job working for Rhodes Bakery in the mail department. So he took a huge pay cut, but was still living the lavish lifestyle that he had been used to his whole life. The concept of living within your means no longer applied to him, it only applied to me. But these are the dangers of believing incorrectly. And because the fruits reveal themselves as wrong. But Mormons have allowed evangelical beliefs to infiltrate Mormonism, as they're saying, no, Abraham, no, that wasn't a translation, no, it was just revelation. We still believe in the papyri as being authentic. The UK authorized them as authentic documents. They're authentic. That's not the point, guys. The point is whether Joseph Smith translated it as he says he did. And I'm the one who has to save the church, and they don't want to be saved. They'd rather destroy the world and themselves rather than listen to me to save them. Yay.